Hello, everyone. Welcome to Global Astronomy Month, the 13th edition. Can't believe it. It's the year 2022. Welcome wherever you are watching. I'm your host, Andrew Fazakis, the Night Sky Guy, here for Astronomers Without Borders. It is so exciting. Astronomy is for everyone. Of course, the night sky is a shared heritage. And we love celebrating the night sky and astronomy here at AWB every year with our flagship program, Global Astronomy Month. It's the world's largest celebration of the night sky and astronomy. And AWB, if you don't know, we are a nonprofit and we are here to do good around the world using astronomy, building and cultivating community through the power that the cosmos has to bring all of us, humanity, together. And boy, we need that more than ever, don't we, now in today's world. And so we welcome all of you. And of course, we're already in our second week in Global Astronomy Month. We've had amazing programs talking about things like mindful stargazing, taking the stress out of your life using the night sky. Just fantastic. And we've talked about doing special education, diversity in education, in astronomical programs. We've done that. We've also had a global star party, bringing together countries, vastly different countries, in this case, Israel, Turkey, and Afghanistan together and observing the moon. Just fantastic stuff. Cutting edge things too, using online technological platforms to really bring those different people to, and breaking down those borders, transcending borders, and really just building world community through the power of astronomy. So it's really fantastic stuff, and you could find all these programs on our Global Astronomy Month official calendar. If you log on to astronomerswithoutborders.org, you can go and see all of these different events that we have. Our Global Astronomy Month calendars right there, including our beautiful video trailer that you just saw at the beginning of this program, is available in multiple languages. So if you're holding astronomy programs around the world, well, you're more than welcome to download that video trailer and use it in your local events. Maybe it's a star party, maybe it's a online presentation, maybe it's a tour using your telescope online. Whatever it is, celebrate Global Astronomy Month and show your support by using our video trailer. That's available on our YouTube channel as well. And I'd like to say big hello to everyone watching on YouTube and Facebook too. And we'd love to hear where you're watching from. Do put in the comment section where you are today joining us from. I'm actually from Montreal, Canada. It's cool, it's bright, great stargazing weather where I am. Our guest speaker today, Norman Marigza, is in the Philippines. We'll find out what the weather is there. I heard it's kind of iffy where he is. It's amazing that he can join us. But look what I've got on the screen right now for you. It's all the upcoming schedule of speakers and events. Even local events are being listed. You see there's Yuri's Night coming up this Tuesday, celebrating, it's an International Day of Human Spaceflight. We've got a special presentation on giving outreach folks tips on how to engage girls at stargazing parties, how to get them interested in astronomy. Fantastic. We got special guest speakers for that event. That's coming up on the 14th. Don't miss that right here on our AWB channel. We've got other events, local events from around the world being listed here, one after the other. I see from Serbia, from Syria as well. We've got special guest speakers on accessibility in astronomy as well. You don't want to miss that on April 19th. There's a special app being developed that allows visually impaired folks to experience the night sky. And I'm really looking forward to that. That sounds like an exciting development in outreach of astronomy. Of course, we also celebrate Globe at Night, amazing citizen science project. We've got the coordinator of that global program with us, giving us lecture on the 21st of April. And right at that, the next day, Globe at Night Citizen Science Project is kicking off. If you're not familiar with it, It's a fantastic light pollution awareness program that you don't want to miss, and take part wherever you are around the world. It's totally accessible using your devices. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff, even IDA, of course, International Dark Sky Week, really important for us. We've been partnering with IDA for years on promoting light pollution awareness and the importance of dark sky, of course, which we share all around the world. These efforts. And if you want to find all this information, you'll all get all of that on our events calendar at gam.awb.org. That's gam-awb.org. Simple enough. Just log on there and it'll take you directly to the calendar. And if you have an event, make sure you share your event with us. Just it's free to become a member at AWB, and you can post your local astronomy event on our official GAM calendar. And of course, if you participate in GAM this year, you are eligible to get a GAM participation certificate that you can proudly display at your next astronomy event. Show your support for Astronomers Without Borders. Now, without further ado, I want to get right into our speaker today and the event. And of course, this is a really interesting thing because we're talking about the connections between humans and the cosmos. And this is a deep connection that we all have. We've all grown up looking at the night sky, many of us from urban conditions. Some of us who are lucky have been able to go out to dark sky areas. And this connection to the night sky goes back to ancient times, really to the beginning of humanity when we sat around ancient campfires. And so we have a special guest speaker, actually our AWB National Coordinator for the Philippines, Norman Marigza. He's an astronomer and an educator, a science communicator who serves as, like I said, our AWB coordinator in the Philippines. And he first got involved with ethnoastronomy through his various engagements for dark sky preservation and awareness. And he's established a working group for the Philippine cultural astronomy and is actively promoting Philippine ethnoastronomy. Norman, I'd like to bring you in. Hey, Norman.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Hi,
Happy
Norman.
Global Astronomy Month.
Thank you so much. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. So it's a bit. There's a storm right now in the Philippines, but I'm good that the weather so far is cooperative. So we have a good connection right now. So
Let's hope it stays for the program.
yes.
That's great, Norman. And so I'm going to throw this over to you so you can tell us all about stellar connections. There you go.
All right. So hello, everyone. So allow me to share my screen. So, okay. Hold on. Right there. Do you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
All right. So once again, good evening from the Philippines. It's currently 10 p.m. in the Philippines. So, or in our local languages, it's magandang gabi, maimbag na rabii, maayong gabi sa inyo tanan. So, uh, tonight we're gonna be, tonight or in the morning, wherever you are, we're gonna be talking about the stellar connections, or understanding how humans are connected to the cosmos, and how we've uh, change our worldviews depending on how we perceive the sky above us. So for me, I basically got into talking about this particular topic through my interactions in dark sky preservation. So if you take note, if you try to do some research when it comes to efforts for dark sky preservation, you could see that part of the things that we are trying to promote in terms of the preservation of our night skies is preserving our cultural heritage when it comes to the night sky. Because for all of us, the night sky is integral. It's part of everything that throughout society, throughout different civilizations, wherever you are in the earth, the night sky has always been there. So it's part of how we've our world around us. It's part about how we see everything, uh, how we change our worldviews, how we develop our thinking. So for me, as an astronomer, I do a lot of public outreach. So just like some of us here in the group, and sometimes when we show constellations, we have kids who, or even adults who ask, why are constellations depicted the way that they are? So if we take a look at some constellations, some of them might fit the description of what they appear like. For example, this grouping of stars, although uh, how we define constellations right now are actually the boundaries, but we still for common those people who still don't are not used to the boundaries or how we establish them with the IAU definition for constellations, we still refer to them with the stellar patterns, the connections. So it's kind of like connect the dots. And these are the things that people question. Why do they appear, or why do they look like what they are? Why are they depicted that way? So some of these constellations match their appearance. For example, you have here Cancer the crab, and then for example this particular constellation, when seen at this particular angle, shows us Leo the lion, right? So some constellations are easy to figure out once you show this kinds of depictions. But sometimes some of the constellations that we see, some of the patterns that we see in sky maps, star charts, show things as confusing as this one. Imagine two stars connected by a line. So this is your Canis Minor. So that's why it's not uncommon to see that notion where people would ask, why, how come these constellations are this object that we see? So if you try to ask them, okay, let's try to think of how you perceive these constellations instead. So let's for example, this particular pattern of stars, the way we know it in terms of the constellations is Aries, right? So this is the depiction of Aries, but if you take a look again at the pattern, it's kind of hard to imagine that this was a ram, this was a goat. So the picture sometimes doesn't match the pattern. So if you try to ask anybody right now, how do they perceive this set of pattern? If you show them the pattern, they might come up with something else. So, for example, those who are into, let's say, uh, first shooter, first person shooter games, they might imagine this like a pistol, a flintlock, right? So it kind that has that curved shape that depicts that same image pattern, right? Uh, if you show a different constellation, for example, you ask a child, sometimes children might associate events even if the picture or the pattern doesn't really match. For example, this pattern can be perceived as a Pokemon like Pikachu, right? If you're into anime, you might perceive the constellation of Crater the Cup as Goku doing a Genki Dama, the Spirit Bomb, right? So it's a matter of how people perceive the patterns based on what they know, what's popular with their culture, what do they associate it with. So it's kind of like a game of association where you're shown a pattern and you try to associate it with something that you know. So it's this kind of mindset basically that drives how people have different perceptions of the night sky. Now, for me, when I prepare a talk, I usually have this image, this pattern where I basically think of, before I make my talk, I pretend like I don't know anything, and then I start to review and recall what I've learned throughout the years and try to look back at the references until eventually I come up with the content that I would be able to share. So this is kind of the pattern that I do in terms of trying to make up or come up with a presentation. So in a similar manner to how people have different perceptions and how we try to figure out and understand what it is that we want to depict in or share in a lecture, for example. Uh, Cultures behave in the same manner in which they try to understand the world around them. So people try to make some inferences or the depictions that they form usually resemble something that what they can understand about their surroundings. It reflects how much they observe the world around them. So it kind of shows that each different star lore, each different cultural approach to astronomy is actually also connected deeply to how the different cultures differ themselves. So it is this in cultural astronomy, we are studying these connections and perspectives, how people perceive the night sky. So different cultures will have different perceptions, and this different cultures, depending on their background, will also have some similarities with other cultures of the same background, or might have some differences depending on the conditions that they have. So these are all about cultural astronomy is all about looking into these perspectives, how much they differ, how people are connected to the night sky. So we're talking about cultural astronomy. We have to define some things first. So when we talk about cultural astronomy, initially, uh, it's interchangeable with the term archaeoastronomy, but as more research gets into this, we can now have a distinction between what we call ethnoastronomy and archaeoastronomy. So, cultural astronomy is basically the umbrella term that describes this. It's the study of diverse ways in which cultures, both ancient and modern, integrate astronomy in their daily lives. So, for ethnoastronomy, uh, it's the study of knowledge and interpretations of specific cultures with regards to celestial objects or phenomena and how they translate to various communal practices. While archaeoastronomy now, we can define it as the study of astronomical alignments, orientations, and symbolisms in ancient and modern architecture. So, ethnoastronomy is more on the knowledge and ideas, while archaeoastronomy is more on the tangible evidence. And they all come together in terms of how people, how communities, collectivities see the night sky into cultural astronomy. So, when we're talking about cultural astronomy, again, we are exploring the connections, their perspectives. And when we look at this, we have to note that we are trying to understand the sky based on the connections of these people in their original context. So, it's very important. The context here is very important because we do not want to take our own understanding and separate it from how people perceive the night sky. So some of the things that we want to take note when we're talking about cultural astronomy, ethnoastronomy, and archaeoastronomy is that this is not astrology, right? So while there are aspects of astronomy, cultural astronomy that might seem metaphysical or quite similar with astrology, this is not the case that we're trying to do. So uh, one description of this by Professor Michael York, Professor Emeritus of Cultural Astronomy, he stated when he was describing cultural astronomy is that we are not going to try to prove astrology. We're going to study people's beliefs about the heavens and how these beliefs impact life on Earth, both for individuals and collectivities. So, unlike astrology, where they define behaviors, define certain things to be absolutes, to be something that is generalized. When we look at cultural astronomy, we are looking at how these unique cultures perceive these kinds of belief systems. So if they believe that certain stars have impacts on their life, or for example, a certain phase of the moon might provide good luck. So we are investigating, we're understanding this from that perspective alone. We do not extend it outward and say this applies to everyone, unlike what astrology does, right? Also, when we try to talk about cultural astronomy, we avoid making it something trivial, like it's just something for popularization, or that we tend to make it into a cultural appropriation. So, what we are trying to avoid, for example, is when you talk about the full moons. Every year, when we have the full moon, the calendar events for astronomy usually share full moon names, right? We have very popular full moon names such as the wolf moon, snow moon, etc. But sometimes the moon names are only taken because of the appeal, and the cultural reference is completely ignored or omitted. So when you are dealing with cultural astronomy, you actually want to keep that cultural reference intact because, for example, uh, one common thing that's being done during April, during the Global Astronomy Month, the full moon name is the pink moon, right? So based on the cultural reference, it's called pink moon because of the blooming of the pink phlox. And this is taken from the culture of the Native Americans, or sometimes the names are taken from the uh, Germanic or Anglo-Saxon counterparts. But again, you have to take note of this, the cultural reference. So when people ignore the cultural reference, sometimes what happens is people intentionally promote it with a manipulated pink tinted moon. So they change the color. Or sometimes, even if they have the definition, they still maintain the usage of a colorized moon. So we're kind of ignoring the whole cultural aspect, the whole reason why it's named as such, right? So even here in the Philippines, sometimes when people use the names, those kinds of references, what we tend to tell people is that if you want to share these things, make sure you mention the cultural reference behind it or avoid using it entirely, given that the cultural aspects behind it does is not universal. It does not apply anywhere in terms of, for example, you say the snow moon. There are countries that don't experience snow, right? Wolf moon. There are countries with no species of wolves, right? So again, it might not be universal. While it might be appealing, we always have to connect it to the original cultural reference. Another thing that we have to avoid when we're talking about cultural astronomy is turning it into a projection of our current thinking, right? So sometimes we have the tendency to define things based on, for example, we want to look at how ancient cultures perceive the sky, and then it becomes trivial na that we have certain cultural names for things and then we want to apply them to the modern context, which sometimes becomes problematic. One example, what I have here, it says tae ng between, or if you translate that, it translates to star feces. So this is a name given for tektites, right? It's quite a common naming scheme given in the Indochina region, Asia Pacific. So many Asian countries refer to tektites in this manner. So what happened sometimes is that if you take this into a wrong context, for example, here in the Philippines, one local magazine, a local chapter of an international magazine, tried to define and distinguish the difference in terms of how we see the meteoroid, meteor, and the meteorite based on our modern definitions today. So they kind of distinguished the meteor as something else, a different term, which we call bulalakaw, and then they describe the meteorite as tae ng between, which becomes another problem because tektites are not technically meteorites, right? So trying to make the definitions or the wordings fit into our modern context is also problematic. So again, we look back into the original context of these wordings, right? We do not transform them to match how we basically define things today. Here's another example where modern projections might clash with culture. So sometimes when you see depictions of constellations, artworks, right? So sometimes they define this as just being artistic freedom. But if you take a close look at the constellations here of Ursa Major, so if you looked at the pictures, the handle of the Big Dipper asterism here in this particular artwork depict the head of the bear, which totally ignores the original context in the cultural aspect. If you're going to see Ursa Major based on the Greek mythologies, the bears are depicted with a long tail. It's the handle of the dipper that is actually, for the small and the big dipper, that are actually the tails of the bear. So people were trying to make it artistically and anatomically correct, but again, it defies the cultural background behind it. So it ignores the context in which, to save the bears, Zeus grabbed the bears by their tail and flung them to the sky. That's why their tails got stretched out. So it's important that when we look at these kinds of cultural aspects, and we want to for example, being artistic with them, we also have to be responsible in terms of taking into consideration their particular context. And this is quite something that's common, especially with how, with, for example, Greek mythology, the most popular of the star lords that we know. There are very many variations to it today, given that we try to create new versions of them for popular culture and all that. So the perceptions of people today when it comes to the Greek mythologies sometimes has been diluted and altered, basically, by these modern depictions. So again, if we want to talk about cultural astronomy, we want to recognize the original context. So when we look at cultural astronomy, you are actually observing that people have a very strong connection with the sky around them. So they're able to perceive the skies, they were able to perceive the changes, and how the stars seem to form site, a pattern in which they repeat every year. So they were very in tune to these changes, and they were also connecting these changes to the different changes in their season, their weather, the blooming of certain plants and trees, for example. So they had a very strong connection to to their surroundings, that they were able to pattern their civilizations around them. So for ancient cultures, when we try to look at the different stars, we can break it down into a practical and metaphysical aspect. But sometimes when we talk about this, they're usually connected, they're usually intertwined. So examples of practical aspects are how people use the stars for timekeeping, for farming, fishing, weather forecasting, and even navigation. Metaphysical examples would be for those that are theistic, spiritualistic, or animalistic, ritualistic healing practices, and even their myths and superstitions. So I'm gonna dive into some examples about this. So here in the Philippines, we have a group which we call the Ginaang Bontok, which they use the sun's position relative to the mountains for timekeeping. Now, if you're going to talk about cultural heritage, the UNESCO basically defines cultural heritage in terms of four categories. So you have the tangible movable, the tangible fixed, uh, the intangible, and then the uh, landscapes, right? So landscapes in this sense is if you preserve the landscape because they have particular uses in terms of a certain culture, then this is an example of such a heritage. So in this aspect here, the mountainous region where the Ginang Bontok stay, if this particular mountainous region is preserved, that certain landscape, then this can be continued to be used for the same purpose of timekeeping. So they had different names for different times in which the sun is at a particular angle with respect to the mountains that they were observing. In a similar manner, if you take a look at some modern, semi-modern structures, uh, now we shift to a landscape in terms of heritage, we shift to a more tangible, such as monuments and site, tangible heritage. We have this Chanquilo solar observatory in Peru, where they use the ridges of this man-made structure to align with the sun's position in different times of the year to basically tell the time. So it behaves in a similar manner, right? So some structures might be man-made. We also have those that are naturally made. Other connections that we can see with the night sky of people is how we try to use stars as a reference for different activities. So for the Jama Mapun people in the Philippines, we have the constellation Tanggong. So if you look at the constellation Aquila, the three stars where Altair is located forms three characters in this in a story of Tanggong, which is Masikla, Tong, and Mayuyu. So Tong is married to Masikla and Mayuyu, and this constellation is used as a marker for when they conduct their rice planting, so agricultural practice. So once they see it rising in the eastern sky in the early evening, they use it as a marker to start their rice planting. So if you also look at the story behind it, how they depicted this particular constellation of three stars, the story of Tanggong actually talks about the legend and the origin of the rice planting. So in its story, basically Mayuyu was a nosy person, right? And Masikla and Tong basically had activities which provided for food for the people. So Masikla basically was putting grass in a pot and cooking it, and she instructed Mayuyu to keep watch of it, do not open it while she goes and looks for fish. So but Mayuyu, being nosy, she opened the pot and she saw that it was grass. So when Masikla came back, she eventually scolded Mayuyu, saying that if you didn't open it, people wouldn't have to work to have to find food, because automatically for them it was supposed to be magical that once you put the plant there, it would turn into food, right? In the same manner, Mayuyu tried to be nosy with Tong, who went out to the fields to as Tong went to plow the fields. But when she saw Tong, Mayuyu saw that he was just playing his flute, and his tools were hacking the plants on its own. So it was just magically cutting and trimming the fields. So when Mayuyu went to confront Tong and scold him for being lazy, the tools dropped, and eventually Tong got angry because he said, if you hadn't interfered, humans wouldn't have to work hard. So, because they got annoyed, Masikla and Tong left for the heaven. So, Masikla, because she got annoyed first, she went ahead, and then Tong followed, and Mayuyu, being afraid to be alone, followed after. So, that's why when perceived from the Philippines, they are in this orientation where they follow one after the other. Right? Another example that we have is for the Samas in Tawi-Tawi. We have the buntal. So the buntal is a puffer fish, right? So they use the constellation crux to determine the wind direction, and in terms of navigation as well. So they tie it because for the Tawi-Tawis in the island regions of Mindanao, they're basically a seafaring culture. So they're very isolated with the rest of the islands of the archipelago of the Philippines. So their associations with the sky is connected to sometimes with things relating to water. So in this case, a puffer fish. So also given that the puffer fish inflates itself with air, so they kind of associate that as well, in which they are able to determine the wind's direction depending on what is the orientation of crooks in the night sky. So once they see Buntal's position in this particular time of a year, they know that the wind will be coming in this direction. So that's how they try to connect it with their depiction of their night sky. Another cultural example would be in for the Bagobos of the Philippines. During an eclipse, we have one moon eater, which is a giant crab. So the giant crab known as Tambanokawa devours the moon during a lunar eclipse. So why a crab? So if you take a look at their culture, they have actually a lot of uses and stories relating to the crab. So it might be that their connections to their environment, where let's say crabs might be something that's common, right? And it might be a source of food for them. So if you try to notice with how they depict it in their other cultural practices, They have examples like they use the crab shell to they place it in their door frame to ward against evil spirits, which they call the buso, right? And if you look at their folklore in terms of how earthquakes happen, based on their legends, their primordial deity, their main deity, uh, created two primeval beings, Kasili and Kayumang. Kasili is a giant eel and Kayumang is a giant crab. And whenever the crab pinches the eel wriggles trying to set itself free, and that's when earthquakes occur. So common usage of particular elements that they use in depicting the night sky as well. So that's why you have a common picture of the crab. Right? Another way people have these kinds of connections is if you take a look at how we try to explain things. For example, like we have our origin myths in terms of how the universe came to be, how people came to be, right? And sometimes we associate them with uh, the stars, right? With the skies, deities in the skies. So for the Cordilleran groups in the Philippines in northern Luzon, we have the tales of the star maiden. So with different groups, there are variations to the stories, but generally, what is explained in the stories is that fair-skinned people, the fair-skinned people, came from race of people who came from the stars. So the stars were actually women who sometimes came to Earth, and in terms of the story, one of them got trapped in Earth and married one of the locals, and that eventually their children became the fair-skinned people. So that's how they explain why there are people with different complexions. Right? So these are just some of the examples how we perceive the different connections of people. So again, different ways in which we depict the sky and how they translate to our cultural practices. So sometimes these connections are at risk in terms of how these interpretations might sometimes get lost or forgotten, or even how our view of the night sky is changing, right? So, through modernization, sometimes you have indigenous groups that are being displaced, right? Sometimes the records or the accounts are getting lost, or sometimes they're not being shared accurately. One particular issue sometimes is for you have ethnic groups that migrate. So, for migrating groups, sometimes the changing in their location might have an effect to how their perceptions of the sky have also changed, right? And another issue sometimes is that when we promote our ethnoastronomy, sometimes the promotion is lacking or sometimes they become inaccurate. Again, just like with what we mentioned about the Greek mythologies, where sometimes the meanings get affected with the different variations. And then, of course, we are these kinds of interpretations with the night sky are affected also by acculturation and cultural assimilation of our ethnic minorities. And then another thing is that for light pollution, again, our connection to the night sky, as how our ancestors perceived the sky in the past, is also being lost. So, in order for us to prevent our cultural astronomy from being lost and for us to be able to promote and preserve it, we need to work together. Cultural astronomy as a science is actually a very interdisciplinary field. So we have to work between different organizations, institutions, and different fields such as astronomy, anthropology, ethnology, history, literature, right? So these kinds of methodologies, there's no one way to go about in terms of cultural astronomy. So it actually entails different learning methodologies and research methodologies. So, for example, an ethnologist has a different way of looking into a culture. An astronomer, of course, will have a different way of looking into these perceptions. So the important thing here is this methods of research, they all come together so that it can be promoted, archived, and preserved. So what we have to do is in terms of promoting this is that we have to do continuous research. We have to continue to promote our local ethnoastronomy in their original context. Again, very important if you're doing cultural astronomy is to consider the original context in which these perceptions are seen. So, ethnoastronomy is all about the human connections as we see it from their unique perspectives. And just like with modern culture today, we might have our own perceptions when we look at the night sky about how we see the constellations and all that, especially with technology today. But again, it's important that we know that these connections, these perceptions, all all can be understood from their own respective context. So this is what I want to share with everyone tonight, from our for our viewers, that cultural astronomy is always about looking at these connections. Okay, so Andrew.
Thank you very much, Norman. That's fantastic. So we are going to open it up for questions. So if anyone has any questions for Norm, we the floor is open now. And I think it's just fantastic, Norm. The what I find is amazing is how widespread the knowledge of the night sky and the importance of the night sky is around the world, and the variety of stories that exist when it comes to the night sky, it and what it means to culture. And this goes back to, like I said at the beginning when I introduced you, I think it's goes back to the very beginnings of humanity. Um, do you see um, th- these connections that you've talked about? Um, do you see that these connections are? Whoops, we've lost Norm. Let's see if he comes back. I think his connection was slow. There he is. Let's see if we can get Norm back. There you are. Hi, Norm. Can you hear me? Oh, I think your mic is off. Hold
All
on.
right.
There we
So
are. There we are. Good.
my video froze a while ago.
Well, no kidding. You've got a typhoon in your area, so I think you have a good reason. Let's hope the connection stays. I was just saying, I was going to ask you if these connections are. Do you find that are they in jeopardy? Do you think in today's digital technology, or is digital age that we live in helping to raise awareness? Which way is it, a negative or positive effect, our current digital age we live in?
Well, in terms of the digital age, it actually can be a way for us to be able to help because given that there's an increased interest, that's why we now have a cultural astronomy entire field in which we can now look at it separately, not just sites as a whole. Can you still hear me?
Yes, yeah, yeah, I can hear you. Your video is freezing, but
Okay,
we
yeah.
can
So
hear
my
you.
video freezes. Yeah, all right. So yeah, so with the advent of our digital technology nowadays, it's easier actually for us to be able to relay the information. Because if you try to take a look at research in cultural astronomy, part of the issue is the access to the literature, given that sometimes these cultures may be remote and hard to visit. So sometimes the research that we want to do is, aside from going to these people themselves, is that we also want to be able to uh, access the research that are sometimes just tied in the academe or sometimes just in some books in the library, right? So having this out in the having this digitized the information helps in terms of the promotion because the accessibility is now being easier for us to share the information out.
Right, exactly. Well, this is just it, and it kind of it 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 kind of allows the awareness around the world. I mean, because we live in the digital age, I feel that the accessibility is unlike anything else before. I remember, you know trying to do look at stories of indigenous people here in North America, about their cultural references to astronomy, and it was very difficult. I would go to a conference and I'd meet with people, and they would say, "Okay, don't worry, Andrew, I'll send you in the mail,
Yes, yes.
some information," and I get it in the mail. But I wouldn't have the freedom that I have today of just logging on to my device and go on the internet and just find information unlike ever before. So I think it has its positive stuff. I have heard, however, which I thought was interesting, is a lot of the elders who have these elders in societies and cultures are dying out, and the younger people
Yes.
are not propagating those connections, that were so attached to their individual cultures. So that is an issue I know some are dealing with.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's kind of important as well that in terms of even with local laws, there should be some local legislations that actually try to help preserve this culture. So uh, with backing from government in terms of preservation of this cultural heritage, it would be easier for us to actually move forward if such laws are in place.
right, right. We have a question from Joanne. Joanne asks, when you are presenting to diverse cultures in our area, how would you suggest we find out about cultural connections to the night sky? Good question,
Hmm.
Joanne.
Okay. Right. Well, in terms of again, you have to think of what particular connections are you after. So let's say there are there's an indigenous group in your area, right? Or ethnic communities. So in terms of trying to get them to talk about this, it kind of matters that you connect with the audiences based on this kinds of perception. So you try to understand it in terms of how they see the sky. So it's not unlike when we do lectures where we're the ones who are actually giving the resource out. It's more of the people telling us their stories of how they perceive these things, right? So for example, for us who do outreach astronomy, when we do telescope viewings, sometimes you hear people suddenly share that, oh, this grouping of stars, this is what they called in our place. So you get them to open up the conversation in which they kind of talk about how they perceived it, right? And then maybe you can build up on that. So again, it also matters with in terms of the methodologies that you want to associate with it. So if you're talking about it in terms of ethnological studies, it requires that you actually stay within the communities themselves. You immerse yourselves in the communities, and sometimes this takes years. So it's a matter of how much of the cultural context you actually want to get off from the different groups. So there are many different ways to go about it.
Yeah, there really is. There's so much options now open for exploring these connections, these cultural connections. It's fantastic. Norm, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's under conditions that you don't have aren't ideal, and thankfully connection lasted great for us. And Norm, before I let you go, maybe you can tell people what are you involved in? What's upcoming for you in terms of your work in astronomy now?
Well, for now, in connection to this, of course, I'm with the IAU Dark Skies Ambassador as well. So we have our upcoming International Dark Sky Week, right, for the Global Astronomy Month and with IDA. So uh, this is one thing that you could actually also look into if you want to plan activities for our IDSW, wherein you can look at the human connections to the night sky. And this is a great way for you to actually engage your communities around you, in which you actually share why the sky, that preserving the night sky is important in terms of sharing as well what your cultures in your surrounding areas find about it that is important. So uh, right now I actually have a lot of I'm involved with different nonprofit groups that gets into these kinds of things. So again, engaging the community is very important. So it's very nice that we have this global astronomy month to engage with a wider global community as well. So for now, I'm concentrating right now with the GAM activities that we have here, and also with the local activities that. So I've been constantly featuring some of the activities being done in the Philippine groups. Uh, yeah. So and other than that, I'm also working on astronomy education and working on some documentations uh, with different astronomy projects.
Yes, and definitely people can find out more information what Norman's doing. Norman is a longtime member with Astronomers Without Borders. We're very fortunate to have his knowledge included onto our platform, and he writes members reports and sharing the work that he's doing in his region of the world. And I invite people to do check that out. Become a member. It's free at AWB. It's a free platform. You can also be a paid member and get the perks that comes with being a part of the AWB community. And you can find all of that information at astronomerswithoutborders.org. And you can look up Norman and see the work that he's doing and how he's connecting with the astronomy community and the general public and sharing all this amazing knowledge. Norman, I want to thank you so much for coming on by our show today and sharing this amazing insight into the human connections with the cosmos from your perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. So happy Global Astronomy Month to all our viewers tonight.
Yes, and same to you. We look forward to many more amazing things, Norman. Thanks for coming by. Bye. So, folks, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed our show today. We have many more things coming your way. All you need to do is, of course, go on to gam-awb.org. That's gam-awb.org. That'll take you straight to our Global Astronomy Month calendar. And if you are an astronomer, an amateur astronomer, someone who's doing outreach and has an event in April, we invite you to share your event on our calendar and make it official, and you'll get a GAM participation certificate for your efforts that you can proudly showcase to everyone at your next event. And that is basically it for today. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here at AWE. We hope you're enjoying Global Astronomy Month. This is the 13th year we're doing this, and it truly is the largest astronomy and night sky festival in the world. And it's all thanks to people like you who watch, who participate wherever you are around the world. And remember, we all share in one people, one sky. That's our message around here at AWB. So thanks again for joining me. I'm Andrew Fazakis, the Night Sky Guy here for Astronomers Without Borders, wishing all of you clear skies. Don't forget, April 14th is our next event. You'll find that on our calendar as well. I'll see you all on the next video. Bye-bye.
From the pale blue dot to the distant stars, we are one. One people, one sky.